The council building in Hilo was packed with local hunters for a highly anticipated Game Management Advisory Commission meeting on Monday night. Highly anticipated because on the hot seat was the new head of DLNR's Division of Forestry and Wildlife, Lisa Hadway.
Today we have Lisa Hadway, who's the new DOFAR administrator. Came all the way from Oahu for us today, so I hope everybody be respectful of her.
The commission wanted Hadway to update them on some hot-button issues affecting hunters, like the proposed changes to certain laws involving Hawaii wildlife.
My neighbor had a sow and, I don't know, 3 or 4 piglets in his coffee farm, right? And asked me to remove the pigs. So what I did is I caught the sow and the pigs. I put them in my truck, in dog kennels. I took them up to part of the forest and I released them. Mm-hmm. Under this definition, have I broken the law?
Well, and that takes us to the prohibited activities, the second part of the question that was posed to me by you folks.
Okay.
And so you know this rules-making process went through its public hearing. And then we have all of those comments and we're integrating in the comments to the 124 rules. As it stands now, based on public comments we received during the process, both at the public hearings and written comments, we're proposing to modify the section in the current draft as it stands now. It was written to transport and release wild animals. Or wildlife. Now we're just going to have it prohibit release. So you can transport those animals and bring them home and confine them. But if you were to release them in the forest, then yes, that would be, you would have broken the rule.
So Lisa, that's a pretty common practice used by pig hunters. Mm-hmm. If I'm not, and I'm not a big pig hunter, but as far as I understand it, and the guys that I represent here on this side of the island, that is a fairly common practice, given that our landscape is so broken up by development, and you've got public land and private land and housing development, and people move pigs around to keep the quality of the animal high, or try to make it higher. It's a practice that's been going on for generations, frankly. Mm-hmm. I don't understand, after all the public comment that occurred, why don't we just, I understand the purpose for the law, right? I mean, coqui frogs and whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody has any benefit in those things, right? But why don't we just exclude game animals, and you could be very specific about it, right? Sheep, pigs, goats, and just be done with this.
Hadway cited a relatively unknown concern for pseudorabies on the island as one reason for the new transportation laws.
And I think part of the other concern had been things like pseudorabies and other diseases moving across the island with some of the released animals that were transported long distances, because there's certain reservoirs of certain diseases in populations, say on Hualalai, but now they've spread, as I understand it.
Does anybody have what pseudorabies is here in Hawaii? Is that?
I see maybe 1 or 2 a year at work. It's there. The odds. The whole pseudorabies process is difficult. You got to be really unlucky to have your dog get it. It's not zoonotic. It won't go to people. Pigs are pretty much dead end hosts, except for the dogs. A lot of the pigs are positive, but your dog can only get it in that 1 week period that they're actually shedding the virus, and it's kind of complex. In other words, you really have to be unlucky. The odds are really against getting it, your dog's getting it. But what happens most of the time is when you do catch that one pig, you're going to lose out kind of plenty of your dogs, because majority of the time you get all your whole pack of good dogs with you.
Okay, so but consuming cooked meat is not a problem.
Oh, no, not
Okay,
a problem.
thank you.
Not a problem. Even the dogs, I mean, you cook them, that's fine.
The new DOFA administrator also gave an update on the pending Game Management Program Development Plan.
And we made an additional request to the, actually to the governor for an additional $750,000 to go towards the game program. Our hopeful budget for the game wildlife program would be 2.6 million, and in fiscal year 16, 3.4 million. And this actually brings the budgeting on par with some of the other programs that are running in DOFA. So one of my objectives in my new role is to try and kind of raise the resources available to the wildlife program, and in particular the game program. And so that's my goal, is to build the infrastructure to help be a more accountable, more responsible game and wildlife program
So their task would be strictly for game and management, not.
associated with these funds. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And one of the main issues, hunters want to know actual locations and total acreage to be fenced and ungulates that are to be removed per the state's watershed protection plan.
That what was such an alarming map were these ones. And when we don't have those fence lines associated with the watershed, and you hear about the watershed initiative, you think that that entire priority watershed is going to be fenced. Something I want to talk about associated with watershed, and I wish I had a pointer.
Lisa, that's gonna stop right there. I'd like to just ask one question. See that even that part, if the 3.5% of DOFR land is fenced, okay, currently, is that just fenced, or is that fenced and considered part of this watershed, or is it just fenced areas around the island? And then
It's
because-
fenced areas around the island because I figured that was a far more important thing to cover the
but from
entire suite.
3.5% to 19%. That's more than a double.
Yeah, but this takes into account some of the dry forest areas like Mauna Kea. Parts of that aren't considered the priority watershed.
But I think that's part of the problem, because the watershed plan, specifically said to double the size of the water. And I mean, it's not your doing or anything like that. I just want to let you know that that's why there's a lot of animosity and stuff, because when we start looking at numbers and sizes, and
Right.
I know because Mauna Kea is kind of probably a big part of that, a big
Yeah.
chunk of that. So it's kind of deceptive that way. But
And
it's
to
like
be-
if they're taking that should have been part of the whole big percentage of what they needed for watershed protection. Because apparently, in speaking with Representative Lowen in Kona, she says that their water, I stressed that can you overlap the watershed protection plan, the forested area?
with the fencing.
No, just where
Oops.
the actual watershed, the blue, yeah.
Yeah.
You can see by like the Kohala area, Kawaihae area, and all that. That's where, I mean, there's no plans for any type of forest protection. And she said that their water comes from the mountain. So if that's the case, then all of Mauna Kea should have been part of the watershed, which is 60,000 acres or whatever. So that should have been sufficient enough to almost double the size of protected area alone if they just included that. And what we see from 3.5% to 22% is quite large. So I know it's
Well-
not your doing, and you just
Tony, if I may, I felt it was more accurate and more transparent to show everybody the entire gamut versus just the watershed fences. And I think that would be deceptive.
Yes.
And I felt it was important to show all of DOFA's projects on the books.
Okay. And we appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate what you're saying here. And the fencing is a very small part of this watershed plan at present. At that meeting on the 24th, Tony specifically asked Chairman Isla that given the watershed, if you want to get back to that watershed map just for 1 second, that watershed covers the entire area, and all of that is priority 1 and priority 2. The goal of priority 1 and priority 2 was to remove all ungulates, period. I mean, that, and Isla confirmed that. Tony specifically asked him, hey, if you had the money today, would you get rid of them today? And he said yes. So the goal ultimately is to, it seems like, remove ungulates from the island, which doesn't fly with the idea of, hunting for our children.
Money is available
can, and I'm talking from a perspective of reality of management on the ground and massive planning processes that have gone on. Kohala Watershed Partnership in cooperation with several of the private landowners as well. So, you know, in terms of the long term, like I said, probably next 10 to 15 years, these are the things that have been planned. So, you know, there is priority watershed that, depending on where that rain belt is important, but there's other activities associated with the watershed that are important, such as invasive species control. That includes things like, you know, if we have some new plant show up, like Myconia, say, starts moving into Kohala where it isn't right now, we would probably be able to use some of the watershed funding to control something like that out there.
The Commission was especially interested in the recent DLNR press release that promised to double the acreage of protected watershed forests in a decade from the 140,000 acres now being managed to more than 480,000 acres.
You know, the Rain Follows the Watershed said that the whole idea of that project was to double the size of protected areas. And then one of my questions is, when does that area start? Because if that plan came out in 2011, does that include the land size at that time? If it was 92,000 acres in 2011, you double that, so it would be 184. Or because like every year, if more and more gets fenced, and then you just keep saying you're going to double that, you're going to double that, then I mean, there's nothing left. And when I read this, you know, it's it says there's 140,000 acres now being managed to conserve Hawaii's forests. What does managed mean versus being priority 1 and 2, which was to fence and eradicate? Because I'm getting mixed up with protected, managed.
Yep, and I understand that,
Thank you.
That's confusing. And part of these maps will help demonstrate that. So one of the important things to understand, because it says 480,000 acres as well. So the funding from the Rain Follows the Forest comes in a couple of ways. It comes in general funds, and it also comes in capital improvement funds. And it goes to fund activities not just of fencing, but it also funds things like invasive species control, outplanting plants, those kinds of things. So some of the funds have gone to the watershed partnerships. That includes work on other jurisdictions of land and other private landowners. So that the approximate 90,000 acres includes all lands, no matter whose jurisdiction it is within the state. The goal is to double that, and it would be on multiple jurisdictions and multiple landowners' land.
The Commission hopes to host another visit from DLNR Chair William
At
Isla.
our last meeting in September, Isla committed to come back and talk to other users, I guess fishermen also, and
When I get back to Honolulu tomorrow, I'll go immediately give that date and see if we can have him show up.
This doesn't pertain to coming to our meeting. This is pertaining to
To
what
a
he
bigger
promised.
meeting.
These people out here said, and you were there, you
Yeah.
heard him say, he would come and spend one Saturday, one all day without time restrictions, no 45-minute deadlines,
No planes to catch.
no planes to catch, and speak with these people and answer some questions that haven't been answered for all these years. So that's, and I know that, what's her name? Not Barbara. What's her
Susie?
name? Teresa has sent him about 8 or 10 emails and has yet to get a response from him or anybody else. And I mean, you know, we don't want to call the kettle black, but it's pretty black.